Welcome to our weekly overview of what's happening in Polish politics. We are coming to you every Monday, so feel free to subscribe in order not to miss any upcoming episodes. Now, what are we going to cover today? Three main topics. First of all, the rule of law. Second, riots in Warsaw. And last but not least, Gliński stopping coronavirus relief payments. Let's look at our first news story, the rule of law. What is it about? In July this year, the prime ministers of Europe decided that in the future, EU payments will be tied to countries respecting a certain set of values that are commonly referred to as the rule of law. These are values like the separation of power, democracy, freedom, human rights, the rights of minorities, and such. And this started a long-lasting and still ongoing dispute on whether this rule of law should be implemented, and if yes, to what extent. Germany, which presides the Council in the second half of 2020, has proposed a rather weak interpretation of the rule of law. The rule of law was meant to only be applied to the actual spending of EU funds. So basically, you could do anything you please in your own country as long as you don't violate laws that are associated with spending EU subsidies. Thankfully, or at least it seems like this is a positive move, thankfully, the European Parliament has forced the Council to change this position and to expand the applicability of the rule of law to all assets of government. So any breach regarding this area, whether it be a repetitive breach or a one-off, whether it will be individual or systemic, will be potentially subject to the rule of law and the conditionality procedure. This means that the Council can rule to reduce or to stop the payment of EU subsidies to a particular EU member state country if this member state country is found to violate this rule of law. So basically to violate some of the very basic principles that the European Union is built upon. The procedure will look like the following. First, the Commission will acknowledge that something like this is happening or might be happening, because this mechanism can also be triggered as a preventive measure. Then the Council will vote on this proposal to apply the rule of law, and it needs to support this proposal with a qualified majority. The EU Parliament wanted that the process will be the opposite, so that a qualified majority would be needed to oppose the proposal of the Commission. But this is not how this mechanism will look like. So right now the proposal is that the EU Council would actually need to support this notion with a qualified majority. And then if this gets implemented, subsidies can be put on hold, future installments of EU payments can be reduced, etc. Poland and Hungary are very much against coupling EU subsidies with the rule of law. And so today, speaking of Ziobro, who actually has nothing to do with EU affairs, as he is responsible for the judiciary sector, for the judiciary branch, has urged Mateusz Morawiecki to fully veto the EU budget Now, why is this connected? Why is one? What does one have to do with the other? In July, the statesmen or the prime ministers and presidents of the EU member states have decided that a qualified majority of the council would be enough to implement this rule of law. So neither Poland nor Hungary will be able to block this. They can be overruled. Now, there's another decision that the EU needs to take, and this concerns the EU budget and also additional funds for the corona recovery. And those actually need a unanimous vote in the Council. So both Hungary and Poland have threatened to block the EU budget if the rule of law is implemented as planned. Now, what is likely to happen? The most negative scenario involves a preliminary EU budget. So basically, there's no binding vote on the EU budget proposal. This means that the EU will enter the next EU budgeting phase without a proper budget. So they will simply carry on the current budget. However, you cannot spend this money on anything new. And the rule of law will also be applicable to those payments. So even though there's no agreement on the final EU budget for the next 6 years, even the funds that the country will receive under the preliminary budget will still be subject to the rule of law procedure. So neither Poland nor Hungary wouldn't actually gain anything in terms of preventing the rule of law procedure. They will only delay the introduction of a proper EU budget, and they would also postpone the introduction of the coronavirus or more corona crisis relief funds. Why? Because those also need a unanimous vote. And if Poland and Hungary continue to block them, the remaining 25 EU member states can agree to sign a separate treaty just between themselves and to guarantee funds for themselves, basically leaving Poland and Hungary out. This would mean for Poland that we are losing roughly 60 billion euro when you count both the direct subsidies and also the low interest rate loans that we would be allowed to take under the project or under the proposed corona relief funds. So we would lose this money. We would not be able to use the preliminary EU budget for anything new, and we would still be subject to the rule of law procedure. Now, is the rule of law procedure something that's great without any shadow of the doubt? No. In fact, it's unfortunate that the behavior and policies of Viktor Orban and Jarosław Kaczyński have pushed the EU so far that we need this procedure. We shouldn't need it. Ideally, we should simply obey and apply those laws, those values, without being forced to do so. Because this new rule of law procedure is actually very powerful. And when used inappropriately, it can actually reduce our sovereignty. So peace has triggered such a majority in the European Union that they are now believing that the only way to negotiate with Poland is actually to force Poland to apply certain policies, which is very unfortunate, because it is entirely possible that in the future Poland will take some measures, for instance around possible German reparations, that will entice either the Commission or the EU Council to apply the rule of law, to force us to change our internal policies. And right now, there's actually no turning back when it comes to implementing this rule of law, which is very unfortunate. It would be far more beneficial, both for Poland and for the European Union, if Poland would simply choose to acknowledge and respect the rights of minorities, the separation of power, the independence of the judiciary, etc., without this extra means of having foreign influence on Poland. Now, let's move to the riots in Warsaw. Last week we were celebrating our independence, the let's say Independence Day, so to speak. It's always being celebrated on November 11th. Unfortunately, as of roughly 2010, Warsaw is seeing violent riots happening. They are mostly inspired by football hooligans who have simply identified this as a very good pretext to come to Warsaw and carry out some riots or fight the police. Of course, neither riots nor football hooligans have anything to do with our independence. So it's a bit of a hostile takeover of this day that should be glorious, happy, cheerful, and instead all you get is hooligans fighting the police in the streets of Warsaw. And even worse, the PiS has passed a law back in 2016 that prioritizes so-called recurring public gatherings. And this means that you only need to apply once and you can get the permission to organize those marches for many years to come. In fact, this year was the last year when their previous permission is still valid. So starting with 2021, the organizers of these marches around November 11th will need to apply for another permission. Hopefully they will not get it because they have violated a lot of the rules and a lot of the requirements that were put in place to keep those marches peaceful. Like thousands of hooligans come to Warsaw, armed with stones, with flares, with knives, and march through the center of our capital, attacking other people, attacking the police. Last Wednesday, as many as 35 policemen were injured, some of them seriously. As many as 300 people have already been arrested as a consequence of those riots. So we definitely need to stop them because those riots have nothing to do with cheerfully celebrating our independence. And the last topic for today is actually Gliński. Gliński is one of the deputy prime ministers, and he's also responsible for any policies regarding our cultural heritage. There was this idea of a special fund being put in place, a recovery fund for people and companies working in the cultural space. So event organizers, singers, theater performers, and also the institutions like theaters, operas, etc. Now, over 2,000 individuals and entities have applied, and over 90% of those have actually received whatever they applied for. But there's a catch. The way this recovery fund was set up basically meant that the government wanted to subsidize you or to provide you with relief, with compensation that would amount to the monetary value that you lost because of the lockdown when it comes to cultural events, concerts, etc., since March 2020. On paper, this might look promising. However, this means that the ones who are earning tons of money over the last years would get the highest compensation, right? Because they would, they would have like many concerts, etc., etc. Those concerts would be cancelled. So instead of this income, they would get the compensation. So the richer you were before the pandemic, the more money you would get now. Versus the people who were owning very little and barely were able to make a living before the pandemic would still get very little or almost nothing. So it was like a perfect example of the richer getting richer and the poorer getting poorer. And of course, this is not what solidarity is about, right? This whole system, this whole compensation system, should have been set up in a totally different way. It should emphasize supporting the ones who need the support the most, instead of giving most of the money to the ones who are perfectly able to support themselves right now. It was calculated that roughly 8.3% of all applicants were meant to receive over 45% of all the funds. So Gliński has put those payments on hold, finally, after a lot of public criticism, and has promised that the list of beneficiaries will be reconsidered again. Now, it is unclear whether this whole program will be cancelled and set up again, whether the people and entities who were already promised to receive the money will need to reapply. That's all up in the air. It's all contributing to a lot of chaos that Poland is currently going through as part of the corona pandemic, and as a result, of course, of this government who was incapable of ruling our country during ordinary times. So it is showing its weakness even more during those extraordinary times of corona. Thanks so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed those updates. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section below. I'll be very happy to respond to them. Stay tuned, please subscribe and follow me, and hope to see you next time in our next weekly update on Polish politics.